Hi, this is a response to Matt, Thou Art That, your video there, Matt, on the myth of a mindless universe, which is in turn a response to Modern Mystics' video on consciousness. A few things about this, really. Some things I'm in complete agreement with you. In some places we part company, as we have in the past, and it's the same places. What I'm in agreement with you about is something you say quite early on. You don't use this term, but you talk about consciousness not as a single undivided principle, although you do kind of hint at that later on, but not as a single undivided principle, but as essentially a disunity, a function of different components that come together to form what we think of as consciousness. And the things that you describe, I'm not sure if you're taking this directly from Steiner, but it's fine, is thinking, feeling, and will. I mean, those are the parts that you decompose the sense of consciousness into, which is kind of fine. I'm going to come back to that in a bit, but it's essentially a folk psychological breakdown based on how consciousness sees itself, how we as conscious entities, how we theorize about the nature of our own brains. I'm not sure how far you can get with that tripartite breakdown, particularly the will thing, but that's something else, I think. But yeah, consciousness is a disunity. Elsewhere I've cited Semir Zeki, who's got this really nice essay called The Disunity of Consciousness. It's not directly related to what we're talking about, but just the idea of that I think is very attractive. And Minsky, who you talking about society of mind as a game. There's you know that there's lots of traditions of that kind of idea that consciousness is not a primitive, it's not a kind of universal solvent that just kind of exists out there, but is the result of or has a series of component parts. Okay, so yes, I would agree with you that consciousness is probably modular. I would say, I'm going to note here, modular but not atomistic. And this is, I guess I'm harking back to something that Nick, the modern mystic, said there. He seems to be, and you seem to be doing as well in some ways, with your taking consciousness right back to single-celled organisms and pushing it even back to gravity. And I think Piro 314 also made a similar kind of suggestion a while back, where, I don't want to misquote him, but it seemed to me he was saying that you could track consciousness back to the molecule as if it's some atomistic element, which who knows? I don't think so. Personally, I doubt it's that you can unpack the atom and find little tiny particles of consciousness in there. I'm simplifying for effect, but you know what I mean. So I would say yes, whilst it's undoubtedly modular, I don't think it's atomistic. The light that comes from these light bulbs is the result of a modular process, but there's not little elements of light in all of the wires and all of the filaments and so on. Anyway, that's not a perfect analogy, I recognise that. But I just want to go back to this modular thing. I mean, the most striking evidence to me of the modularity of consciousness, and I'm talking about phenomenological modularity, I guess here, but I think it almost certainly relates to very particular physical modularities, is the fact that it can be broken down, and it does routinely break down in normal consciousness, normal life experience, but in either aberrant or dysfunctional mental states. So here I'm thinking about out-of-body experiences, for example, which I know you've talked about before, Matt, and which I've got a little bit of experience of. An out-of-body experience, however it's induced, and it can be induced relatively simply, maintains most of the sense of consciousness, but detaches it from the sense of being inside one's own body or inside one's own head. So what that demonstrates to me is this feeling of consciousness, normal consciousness, the ones that, if I can use the word normal, that I seem to be having right now, has a modular component which seems to locate it in the same coterminous with where the body is. But the fact that it is possible to detach that displays to me that that there's an element of it which is present in normal consciousness to do with location. Out-of-body experience. I guess I'm also thinking about something like Jill Bolte-Taylor. I know you did a video ages ago on Jill Bolte-Taylor's TED Talk, My Stroke of Insight, where she has a stroke, part of her right brain shuts down and her sense of self expands to fill the space available, like a gas or something like it. She becomes immense. And here I'm reminded of both Douglas Harding and Thomas Traherne and that kind of mystical tradition, which is a bit odd, really. But yes, which again tells me that there's some kind of modular process producing normal consciousness, which, if something goes wrong in that terms, or if you're a mystic, if something goes right in those terms, changes the size, the kind of size and location information of what consciousness is. And when that's disappeared, the boundaries disappear. So it tells me that, again, there's a modular script being enacted there. Other kinds of dysfunctions, hemispherical neglect, I guess you'll know about, I'm sure you know about. Blind sight, that's a really interesting phenomenon, isn't it? Where consciousness effectively becomes detached from perception. You know, you cut the corpus callosum and get this right, I think the left side of the brain isn't getting information from the right side of the visual field, or something like that. Plenty of stuff written on that. But either way, it becomes possible for perception to continue, but consciousness of that perception to cease. So again, that's suggesting that there's some modular components which, under normal circumstances, link these things and form what we call full consciousness. But the fact that it can be broken down in these ways reinforces the idea of its modularity. Alien hand syndrome, the lead character in Dr. Strangelove, who keeps going into Nazi salutes, and part of his body is resisting that. Again, that suggests that there's something about consciousness which is modular, perhaps to do with the will thing that you mentioned. You know, the will, or something like will. I don't really like that term. I think it decomposes smaller than that. But something like will can separate off and can become an independent agent. But under normal circumstances, we don't experience that separation. We experience the unity, the singularity, the apparent unity, apparent singularity of consciousness. Some the symptoms of some people in persistent vegetative states demonstrate the breakdown of that. There are some cases where people have very, very, I don't know how best to describe this really, but very intermittent and very fragile and very kind of thin consciousness. They're not consciousness of, I can't really get into that, but I can't describe it. But there are elements of that are, again, demonstrating the modularity of consciousness, and some parts of that modularity can continue to function, producing some reduced conscious experience, but other parts of it have completely disappeared. And the one that I've been thinking about recently is sleep, and this is something that Professor Anton, was talking about in a couple of his videos, deep sleep and waking from deep sleep. Because waking from deep sleep is not like waking from unconsciousness, and it's not like waking from a faint, and it's not like waking from anesthesia or other experiences. It's very particular. My experience, and I don't think I'm particularly unique in this, is that I'm one of those people who's got a very good sense of time. I have no sense of direction, but I have a very good sense of time. So I usually know what time it is within 5 or 10 minutes. And that still operates when I'm awake. If I wake up, I can usually guess what time it is to within 5 or 10 minutes without looking at my watch. Which means that something is going on, some fragmentary element of consciousness to do with the passage of time. It seems to me must be still operating whilst I'm asleep. But everything else is shut down. Perception's gone down. Will has gone down in your terms, and a bunch of other stuff is gone offline. But something about the passage of time seems to be still ticking away in the background, which again I think reinforces the modularity of consciousness. And of course, the most striking argument I think for modularity as opposed to an atomistic or a kind of a special consciousness aura of some kind. The best argument against that is just the fact that the whole thing can be switched off. The history of anesthesia is the history of being able to switch off consciousness at the flick of a switch or the injection of a chemical. Consciousness can just stop, which is really interesting, I think. And then the fact that we can do that, the body continues. The mechanism, the machinery of the body continues to function under normal circumstances if you do it right. But the body goes down. And actually people who work in anesthesia recognise that it is shutting down in stages. The body does shut down in stages. Consciousness shuts down in stages. So again, it's modular, it's not singular or atomistic. Okay. Actually, this anesthesia thing, I was going to mention this because I thought it was really interesting. This anesthesia thing, the fact that we can shut the body down, turn it off for a while, put it off, press the hibernate button on your computer. We can kind of do that, can't we? I mean, that's really interesting. And I want to just return to the unholy trinity you started off with: thinking, feeling, and will. Will is, again, problematic for me, but it's funny because when we do the anesthesia thing, I guess what we think we're doing is shutting down the whole thing, don't we? At least in my terms. You shut down thinking. I mean, cognitive processes continue, but unless they're conscious, in my terms, that's not, I wouldn't call that thinking. We may disagree on that. But certainly you shut down all of those biochemical, neurological processes that we think of as thinking. Other processes continue. But also, and the ones to do with feeling, which of course in anesthesia are the most important ones, certainly physical sensations of pain are shut down. And in your terms, will, again, I would want to decompose that further. That shuts down. You're under no volitional control when you're under anaesthetic. And related forms of chemical adjustments to the functioning of the human organism. I'm thinking here of mood alterants, particularly antidepressants or something like that. And particularly some of the earlier ones, like injecting people with massive syringes of lithium, I think it was, which just depress the mood completely. You can kind of still think, you're still conscious, so I think we would agree is thinking is still going on, but feeling becomes enormously reduced. It's very hard to care about anything, it's very hard to have any kind of mood. So again, you can reduce various bits of consciousness. And actually something like volition, will, does go down in those things as well, I believe. But either way, you can make those changes. I mean, just for a little thought experiment, when I was thinking about this, I was thinking it would be interesting if there was another set of chemicals, and indeed there are, I'm sure, which did the opposite, which reduced the thinking but can maintain the feeling. So that by ingesting this substance, the cognitive processes of thinking disappear. The ability to frame rational thoughts, the ability to put sentences together, the ability to express oneself, the ability to describe what you're doing. All of that disappears. But the feeling of feeling doesn't disappear. You can still feel pain, you can still feel joy, you can still feel anger. All of those things persist. There's no reason why that couldn't happen, I don't think. Since we can do the reverse, we could do that. I think if you did that, you'd probably get a good idea what it's like to be an animal. Anyway, that's not really. Okay, just two more things, very small points. You make this point, I can't remember the exact phrase you used there, Matt, but it's something like mind was always in the universe. Mind was always in the universe. This is an idea that I have a problem with, because I've been through it with you before, and I haven't changed since then. I think that's an appeal to an essentialism of mind, which is kind of counter to what you say in the beginning about thinking, feeling and will. Unless you're saying that thinking, feeling and will exist as noble gases out there in the universe, and occasionally they combine to form a unified gaseous conscious. I don't know. I can't kind of see where I'm going with that. Mind was always in the universe. I can't see how that could possibly be the case. An analogy, I guess, I would think of there would be saying that matter was always in the universe. Well, it wasn't. There was no matter in the universe until, I don't know, whatever it was, 1 billion years after the Big Bang, when stars formed. And I know my physics may be way off, but just adjust the time scales to make it work. There was no. It doesn't make sense to say there was always matter in the universe, because there so clearly is now. And if it was somehow possible to go back to those first few moments, or those first few millennia, you could look around any way you wanted. You wouldn't find the evidence for matter. You wouldn't find really any evidence for chemistry, never mind matter. So I don't think it wouldn't make, just as it wouldn't make any sense to say there's always been matter in the universe simply because here it is. and it was somehow there in potential, even though you couldn't even access the potential if you went back there. So I don't think it makes any sense to say that mind was always in the universe. Mind clearly is in the universe now, and it seems to be generated by these complex organisms called brains, which I think we're probably in agreement are modular. Okay, the other thing, and this is something that's I'm irritated by. Sorry, Matt, it's not a great irritation. It's this mechanistic worldview thing. I made a video about this a while back. I can't even remember I even posted it. Mechanistic worldview. You've used that a couple of times in this video, and a lot of people use it. There was an interview, a thing online with Rupert Sheldrake, and he used it. And Terence McKenna's used it, mechanistic worldview. And people like Fritjof Capra cite the mechanistic worldview. And this is always the bogeyman, isn't it? The mechanistic worldview is the I don't know. It's just this. It's this phrase that we use when we want to mean inadequate descriptions. But it's really it's a Tin Man argument. It's a Tin Man argument. I'm going to copyright this phrase, Tin Man argument, because it's invoking a mechanism which is, as you say yourself in this video, Matt, is essentially Newtonian, and or at the very best, it's a kind of ZX Spectrum, or it's a Commodore 64 from the early 90s. It's that kind of a machine that you're invoking. And machines aren't like that. Machines is everything from a step or a slope to the human cell, in my opinion. Or a cell in a body, or whatever. I think I don't see the separation between between what you're calling machines and what we're calling the rest of the world. I think it's an artificial separation you're putting in place there. And you're using the machine paradigm, you're invoking the machine paradigm to remind us of things like steam engines and pumps, or as I say at best, early computers, and ridiculing mechanisms as a result of that. But I think we need we undoubtedly, I'm with you on this, we definitely need a better understanding of machinery and what mechanism is, and the sophistication of mechanism. But even this laptop and even this camera are more sophisticated. They would not be covered by the kind of mechanism that you're talking about here. Anyhow, that's that. Thanks, Matt. It's nice to talk to you.